Hello, time appropriate greetings. Welcome to Into the Terminal. Today, we're going to be talking about operationalizing. Say that 5 times fast.
It's a tough word.
I know. So, joining me as always is Nate, and we'll talk to Nate. Nate will actually be driving our critical path today, but we'll talk together about.
Yeah. I've got the keys to the demo car today.
That's right.
We're going to the mall.
Jump on in.
All right.
Why don't you take us through making a container file?
Absolutely. So in our previous episodes, we just kind of took a container that was already built and we ran it. We did some stuff in Builda, which, we manually created a container and wrote that out and then ran it. What we're going to do today is we're going to take sort of the same thing we built in Builda and we're going to put it in a container file so that you can make this more repeatable, right? So I've already got some directory structure in here. We're going to go on into there. We're going to make a container file. And the syntax, or not the syntax, the capitalization is important. When I do the build later, it'll look for a file that's literally called container file with a capital C, or it'll also use the old school Docker file with a capital D. All right, so I'm going to copy and paste these in here instead of trying to type them all out. And you guys watch me do all my typos. All right, now we're going to talk through what these things are. So that's what we're basing our container on. Now, you might notice we're not building this completely from scratch. We're starting with a UBI base. There's a whole reason that these things exist. They're meant to be a base for containers. I suppose you could build all this stuff from scratch, but why? There's already so many options out there as a base. We chose to use UBI because we like UBI. The next thing we're doing is we're running 2 commands. First is we're going to install just simply Apache's HTTPD. And then we're going to enable it the same way we did when we did it with Builda last week. Then we're going to put in an index file, and I'll show you the index file in a minute. This file is literally right in the directory where the container file exists. I suppose you could define a path to where that is if it's not inside of this directory, but this just makes it so much easier. And we tell it where to copy to. Now, this runs inside of the container. So it's taking a file in your file system and putting it into the container in the path that you called out here. So obviously var www.html is where you would normally put your index file for your website. Obviously, you could put a whole web application or something in there. And, for the sake of simplicity, we're doing it this way. Then we expose port 80 because that's where Apache is going to run. Obviously, if we were doing this with SSL or TLS, we would expose 443 as well. But again, simplicity is what we're going for here. And then just like Scott did with Builda last week, we're running this stripped down init, which calls the unit file that we enabled earlier on. Okay. So this should all look very familiar, except now we put it inside of a file that we can just execute right now. I told you we have this index file. Not lying. It's right here. It's my super awesome website. Literally the exact same file. Well, maybe not literally. A copy of the exact same file that Scott used last week. All right, now we're just going to build the container. And again, I have this over here. Give me just a sec. Copy and paste makes typos a lot less likely, unless Google Docs messes me up again. All right, so podman, obviously that's our container engine. Build, we're telling it to build a container. -t httpd-local. This is what I want to call the container. That's also a tag, right? There's not officially a name on the container image. There's tags on the container image, and we'll go into that more a little bit later. And the dot at the end tells it where it's building at, the directory that we're in right now. You just hit enter, and it's going to go through all the steps you should recognize from when Scott did this with Builda last week. It's basically doing the exact same stuff. It's pulling in UBI. So here it is pulling it down from the container registry. This takes a few minutes. Then you'll see it run. There's the DNF install for HTTPD. You can literally see the output of DNF right here.
So Nate, while we're waiting for it to build, why would we use a container file instead of typing all the commands in by hand like we did last episode?
So the nice thing about a container file is you can track it in, say, a software repository so that when you make changes to it, you can then see what changes have occurred. You can share it more easily. You can make this, it's easy to go back and make a quick change, right? You don't have to either remember or have written down what commands you ran. There may be ways to output this with Builda. Even I'm not as familiar with Builda as you are, so maybe there's something we can do that would generate the container file. I usually make them by hand. I don't do it with Builda. So anyway, two different ways to get the same thing done. All right, so back to the terminal. We got it built now. Now, because I switched windows here, I'm out of my commands. Now we're just going to run the container. Actually, here, let's do podman images. You can see it here now. Here's the HTTPD local that I just made. Tells me that it's tagged as latest, gives me an image ID. But like I said, we can call it by that name when we try to run it. So we're going to copy paste. Now we're going to podman run. -D says to daemonize it, put it in the background, or detach it. P tells it what port to pass through. We're going to just pass port 80 right in. And HTTPD local is the name of the image that we want to run. And it should just run. There it is. Now, if we do a podman PS, we should see it running. And if we curl localhost. Oh, see, this is why I should have copied and pasted, Scott. There we go. There's our super awesome website. So there we go. We took a container file. We defined what we wanted the container to look like in it. We built it and we ran it. And here it is up and running. After the break, we're going to go into a little more about, say, modifying that container file, adding tags, and some other things about, how to run containers in a more repeatable way. So we'll see you after the break.
All right, everybody, welcome to After the Transition. Finished our critical path. Great demo, Nate. Look forward to doing some more with operationalizing containers. Now's the time where we take questions from the audience. We'll talk about a little bit more depth on the topic of the day, which is operationalizing containers. And yeah, that's about where we are. Oh, don't forget to mash the like and subscribe button. I always forget to tell people that, but
Yeah, absolutely.
Happens if we know that we're doing the right stuff.
Yeah, if no one mashes the like and subscribe button, how will we know that you liked what we did? Right? And how will you know when we do more of it?
Has to be a mash. Can't be a gentle, kind press. Has to be a mash.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. In fact, I recommend that you go and pull that old mouse you have in the closet out so that you can hook that up and then really mash the button. Just, you don't want to break your production everyday mouse because that might be a nicer mouse. Your button mashing mouse.
Exactly. So, Nate, the point is back onto target.
What?
So in the critical path, you had mentioned tagging a little bit. And when we're going through, you said, okay, it's here. And notice it's tagged as latest.
Yep.
So tagging is what for containers?
So tagging is really, it's just like tagging anywhere else. It's a way to add an identifier to your image, right? Commonly, what'll happen is you have a project. Maybe there's different variations of that project, or maybe there's a new version under development. You'll tag it in such a way that people can tell. So latest is probably the thing that most people are going to want to grab and run. Latest with a tag after it might be like, oh, well, or not latest with a tag, image name with a tag after it might be, this is the latest development release, or this is the usual plus a thing, right? Like the Apache container, for example. I don't know if it does this for UBI, but I know the one that's up on Docker Hub, there's several revisions of it. There's one that's based on Alpine. There's one that's got HTTPD with PHP, right? Things like that. And we have an example where we're going to add PHP to the container we just built. And we can jump into that if there's no other questions, if that's what we'd like.
Well, I also wanted to point out that it's common in software to have versioning, right? And
right.
when you're building stuff, we saw that a couple episodes ago with RPMs, where we would add the name, release, and version, the NVR, name, version, and release. And the release was the version of the packager who made the RPM. And so tagging is that. It doesn't always indicate the version of the software that's contained within the container. Instead, it's the build number that you can use for tracking your container.
Right.
It doesn't have to be a
Right.
number. That's
Right.
typically
It can be anything. In fact, in the example we have here, it's not a number. Um, I've also, and generally what you might see is latest will get relinked to one of those other tags, right? Latest isn't, in my example, latest was just the build, right? But you may link latest to, version XYZ because that's the one you want people to grab if they just pull your container. If they pull your container without specifying a tag, it'll pull latest.
right. And you had mentioned UBI. UBI also uses versioning in its tags. And so that's how we do things like track when there's a critical or important security errata that we have to apply. We will rebuild a container. That new container will be tagged as latest, but it will also have a numeric tag. And that's how you can compare what you're running versus what we're offering as the latest. You can also look through using the Red Hat container repository to look at previous versions of the UBI containers by changing the tag number that you're looking at. And you can get reports on things like what RPM packages are actually included in that thing. So you want to do
Right.
an example of tagging?
Yeah, let's hop back to the terminal, and I've got an example here. Let me find it in my notes. Here it is. All right, so we're going to take the same container file that we just worked with. We're going to make a couple of changes. Or I am not copy and pasting again. Now we're going to copy and paste. So first of all, we're going to add in another package installation underneath our first DNF run. We're just going to add a new line, paste this in here, copy and paste, added another line. So you can tell we're adding now the module for PHP, right? So this comes from AppStream. And instead of copying in index.html, we're going to copy in index.php. Okay, so you'll see it's been a very long time since I've written any PHP, but I'm pretty sure this is still valid PHP. Very simple, but valid PHP. It just prints hello from PHP. All right, and now we're going to rebuild our container with a new tag on it that says it's a PHP build. So give me a second here to copy and paste that.
So Nate, we missed out on an opportunity. We could have called it hello.
Oh yes, I could have
Hello.
called it hello dot PHP. Yes. Um, all right. So again, podman build tells it we're going to build a container or an image anyway. -t. This time we did http local, same name we used last time, except now I added that colon PHP. So, and we'll see in a second what that does. And then of course we tell it what directory to build in, which is the working directory. So here we go. That's gonna does that whole layered file system that we talked about earlier. It went by pretty quickly, but you might have noticed it did not reinstall HTTPD. It's just picking up from the first change I made, which is where I told it to install the PHP module. All right. Now we're going to clear the screen so you guys can see better. And I don't want to do that. I wanted to do podman images again to show you that we now have another image or images. Got not copy and pasting. I should be copy and pasting even for the simple commands. Okay, now we've got a PHP, or sorry, an HTTP local right here. This is latest. That's the one we just built. You can see it says right here 9 minutes ago, right? That hasn't changed. If we try to build a new container using HTTP local, it'll still use latest, and it'll still use the one that did not include PHP. But now we have this one here as well, HTTP local with a tag PHP. All right, so let's run that, and then we'll see if it works. Now I'm going to copy and paste. Okay, so podman run, again, in detached mode. Port, we're going to use port 81 this time because we didn't stop the other container. HTTP local :PHP. Should just come up and run. Right, now if we do a podman ps, now we're going to see that they're both running. This one's up for 4 seconds. This one's up for 8 minutes. See port 80, port 81. See our great naming conventions there that came. And of course, right here, the image shows latest for the first one we ran and :PHP for the second one we ran. Now, yeah, I'll mix it up. I'll do localhost instead of 127.0.0.1 this time. Port 81 should get us hello from PHP. Now we have it up and running with PHP. All right, any questions on that? I haven't been watching chat at all, guys. Sorry, I've been busy in the terminal.
I mean, fair point.
Latest tag is challenging concept. Yeah, I'll agree with that. Right, the idea of the latest tag is sometimes confusing, even if you're looking at professionally built production containers that you can find out in the world.
Yeah, actually, pretty much all of the tools that we're using, things like Podman, Builda, if you don't specify the tag, it will pull latest. So when we do something like a Builda from UBI, because we didn't tell it a version number, it pulls whatever is tagged as latest.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of normal, and could be somewhat surprising if that's not what you expected.
Right. So yeah, definitely if you have specific needs that a specific version of the container addresses, you need to make sure you're applying that specific tag. Now, on the other hand, most projects, when they release their, I shouldn't say most, a lot of them that I've used, when they release their containers, they will take the latest version, they'll have a tag for it, but that'll also be latest, right? So there'll be two ways you can pull that. If you want your container file to be dependable in a way that you're sure it's on the version that you want it to be on, right? Say you're not sure what next version's changes will bring. If you tag it specifically with that version, then every time you build that container, it's going to be that version of the software. Now, obviously, that means you have to go back there and increment that whenever there's a new version and you want to rebuild your container, but it gives you that consistency that you might want from production containers. So that's another way tags are pretty useful.
Yeah, and I saw that Shantanu had posted a question as well. Uh, have you seen folks committing the builder commands as a bash script instead of a container file? So you can accomplish it that way. Um, and I have seen people doing that. In fact, like in some of our stuff, that's what we do for like the ephemeral lab environments. Because the setup commands run as a script, we just kind of throw them in there and build them that way. But in containery world, giving someone a container file or a Docker file is the more accepted way of doing it because they can just
Right.
use their container tooling, like build a from or build a bud, which is build using Docker file, and then they can specify the file and it will do all the stuff rather than having them also have to know Bash shell script. Tools that may not be based on Bash, like
Mhm.
IDEs running on someone's desktop, may not know about Bash, but they will know about container and Docker files because that's what they're designed to work with.
Right. It's probably a safe bet that if you're trying to standardize how you're building your containers, you should use a container file / Docker file. And generally those two file names can be used interchangeably. It's just kind of the way things have panned out.
Yeah, I also see. Oh, there it is. Jeff asked, "What other registry options do you like for easy delivery of images?" So that's a tough one. Here on Into the Terminal, because we focus on critical skills, we're not going to get into registries and managing registries. The Red Hat product is Quay, but and that's what we use for like powering stuff like the Red Hat um, container catalog. Uh, Docker uses their own, which is what they use for Docker Hub.
Hmm.
And we publish stuff in Docker Hub. So from our standpoint, uh, we're using just local registry because we're not going to do all the setup and maintenance of a service registry, at least not
Right.
in the
Right. And Podman helpfully will, if you specify a container image name without specifying the registry, will come up and ask you which registry you want to get it from. And I believe that list of registries is configurable. You can tell it what registries to query, right? And it'll say, do you want to get it from Red Hat's registry? Do you want to get it from Docker Hub? Do you want to get it from here, from there, right? I think there's a Fedora one that exists as well, if I remember correctly, that it'll now I'm going off script, but there's three. I forget what the third one is. That it'll ask you, do you want to get it from one of these three, and then you can just pick it in the list. And again, configurable list.
Yes, and there's a configuration file where you add that, but the ones that we ship with are Docker Hub and Red Hat. And do we ship with Fedora? We may.
I don't remember.
All right. So we talked about container files, and the reason that we're doing container files is because we want to be able to hand someone this thing, and like
Here's the three.
there you go. They didn't have to have the container downloaded and all that stuff. Like you could just literally hand them the container file. They can run a command and it builds it.
Right.
And then as you make changes, as you're iterating over your container, you can update that file and then it'll rebuild running your single command, right? The podman
Right.
build.
Yep. So most applications that I've come across, you'll be able to find a Git repository from the maintainers where you can get that container file or Docker file. They'll also give you other ways to more programmatically run it within your environment, right? Like they'll give you a Kubernetes Helm chart or whatever they call it. They'll give you all the code that came with it. They'll give you, and of course, the built image, right? So you don't have to go and do all that. You can just go get the image from whatever registry they publish to. They also give you the container file if you want to change that. So that's handy.
All right. So I do want to like keep pushing forward because one of the
Yep.
other things that we talked about in our pre-show briefing, Nate, was persistence. Right? Containers
Yes.
by themselves are not persistent. So if we like
Yeah.
destroy one of those two that you're running, it's gone. All of its data is gone.
Right.
So how are some ways that we can increase the persistence or availability of our containers?
Right. So if you remember during the container file, we had that copy command that copied a file in. That file will always be there when I run that container because it was copied into the image. It's built into the image. However, if I were to copy a new file into my container in whatever way I want to get it done, there's ways to do it through Podman. There's other ways to like sideload essentially files into there. As soon as I delete that container and rebuild it, all those extra files are gone. So the way Podman or really any Docker or any container engine that I've dealt with deals with this is you can map in persistent storage, right? So the stuff that's in your container is referred to as ephemeral storage. The stuff that you map in is called persistent storage. And there's a number of drivers that you can back end this stuff with. We're going to use local file systems because it's really convenient and really easy to do in Podman in RHEL. So first, what we're going to do here is we're going to make some directories because we need places to put the stuff. Let me just get the right place here so that my copy and paste works properly. So we're going to make a directory inside of it doesn't have to be inside of the same place where you put your container file. This is where I put it for convenience. So it's in my home directory in httpd local logs and in my home directory http local www. So you can imagine what we're going to try to map in. Now, the logs is important, and we'll talk about this. In fact, I don't know, Scott, if you can talk about that as I'm doing my stuff here, but getting logs out of the container is important.
Yeah, because what happens when your container may be misbehaving? If you were to just kill it or stop it, it's not running anymore. So you've changed its state. So how do
Right.
you actually troubleshoot what's going on there to figure it out? And so if we instead make a space where we can visit the logs without having to connect to the container and maybe mess with its state, we can do some troubleshooting from the logs that are being written out by the container.
Right. All right. So what I did here, so those logs, for example, that would be a great example of ephemeral storage, right? If they're being stored in the container, they're being written to the container's file system layer. If you stop or delete that container or it dies and you delete it, those logs are gone, right? Now you can get logs from Podman if they're being output to standard out. They're not always output to standard out, but you can do that when you set up a container. We're not really going to go that deep into this, but you can do a Podman logs on a container and see what is going to standard output. All right, so what I did here is I made the directories, and of course, we need to put SE Linux contexts on them. The context for container files is surprisingly container file T. So you can see here, I assigned that, and now I'm going to nuke my clipboard by copying, by highlighting that. I set it on both the logs and www directories. I got to recopy this from my document. Then we just did a restorecon to apply those policy changes. And now we're going to run the container again. So this time we're going to do podman run. We're doing -v to give it a volume, right? And we tell it my home directory. Sorry, I'm just trying to get back to it here. Maybe it's easier to just highlight it like that. My home directory, www, that's the local directory that we want to map into. And then on the other side of this colon here is var www.html. Same deal here for httpd local logs, right? var log httpd. Give it a port. We give it a name. I just realized I forgot to put the -d for detached mode. Let me do that quick. Otherwise, it's going to run in the foreground. And if we hit enter, it should run it. Again, notice we're using HTTP local, not the PHP version that we made. So this is, again, to demonstrate that that old one still exists. It's still latest. All right, and there it goes. It's running, or it should be running. We do a podman PS. We should see another container running. Notice it's on latest again. See this one that's 7 seconds old? It's running on latest. It's running. We gave it a name, persistent web. I didn't call that out, but -- name persistent web. The other ones we didn't give it a name, so it just has these generated names. This way we can call that more easily if we wanted to in the future. Now, you remember that the image that we built had an index file copied into it, right? But now we've mapped local storage where that index file would have been copied to. So what do you think happens to that, Scott?
I'm guessing that it reaches into our local directory to pull that file, which also means we could change that file and the container's content would, or what the container is serving would also be updatable.
Right. So at the moment, we haven't put a file in place, but we mapped a volume in for var www.html. If I hit enter now, we should get the RHEL test page. And there it is. I know maybe that's hard to tell through curl, but I didn't want to go through the effort of switching browsers around here. So that is the test page. If we go into HTTP local and we go into www, you'll notice there's nothing here. So what Apache does on RHEL is if there's no index file, instead of giving you a not found error, it gives you the test page. So let's just make an index file. And we'll go. Not a super businessy website because I want to spare you guys all the typing. I'm doing enough typos as it is. So we're just going to make a file. We probably need to restorecon it again. Yep. And then also, it's worth showing you while we're here. If we go to logs, you see there's now an access and an error log. There's my curl access from earlier. Error log should be empty. I guess it's not empty. Oh, it's the usual can't determine the server's host name and things like that. Errors that you get every time you start up Apache that's in this very bare bones configuration state. But there's our log files, right? As we said. Now, if we curl again, so if I do Control R and search for curl, should get us 8080 again. Why is it not? What did I do wrong? It should work.
Permissions.
That might be it. Maybe it needs to be owned. No, it should be readable. Huh.
And just do a ls-z just to make sure.
You get the. No, it didn't.
No, that's it.
I did a restorecon.
But did you do a recursive restorecon?
I thought I did. Huh. All container file. See, that didn't get container file either. For some reason my subdirectories aren't getting it. Did I mess up my
You may have. But isn't that index
it.
supposed to be in the www?
Did I put it in the wrong place? No, it's right here.
Okay. And if you do an ls-z there? So we can
wrong
just do
context.
chcon if you want.
What is it? chcon.
Yep.
And then just the
-t.
That.
Yep. All right, so let's try a curl again.
There we go. See, Linux is hard, folks, but it's totally it's high. Look, high.
Now we'll send Nate back to SE Linux school.
I'm telling you, it's ironic because I made those troubleshooting challenges for Summit, and SE Linux was part of it. How quickly you get rusty.
Remember when we were a scant few minutes before show troubleshooting the ad.
What are you talking about, Scott? These things are prepared well in advance, and they are never ever last minute.
Right. I think the slash that we were missing may be the thing.
Yes, I think that's it. I think I messed up the regex. So anyway, yeah, I guess this is a good chance. Are there any questions regarding this stuff? Stop disabling selinux.com came up, so that's good.
Yep. Thanks, Eric. So
the only thing that we wanted to demo yet was how to run these in systemd. We're kind of out of time. I can at least show you how to generate the unit file, and hopefully we've got lots of other content about how systemd works. And this is going to be off the cuff because I didn't look at your notes from how to build the
copy pastable.
Yeah, look at that, copy pastable.
Except you do have to change my tag for the name to your actual container name.
Yep. Okay, so Podman has these really cool, and let me clear so you guys can see better. Podman has these really cool generate commands that you can output stuff that you can then reuse later, right? Like you can generate a Kubernetes definition, a YAML file, which you can then use to redefine a pod later. Well, one of the things it'll do is generate a systemd unit file for your container. As you might remember, Podman does not run a daemon like Docker does. So the containers that we're running, we ran them as the user that we're logged in, which happens to be root, doesn't have to be root. And then they're just kind of running in our session. If the system reboots or if the container stops for some other reason, it won't restart. Now there's a restart policy you could apply to these, but a better way to do it, in my opinion, is to actually define a systemd unit so that you can just do system control start on the name of your thing, right? So podman generate is the subcommand we want to run, and we want to generate a systemd unit file. Just systemd. Files tells it we want it to output to files. Otherwise, it'll output to standard out, which you could then, of course, redirect if you wanted to. But there's a handy command here that just says make us files. Then we want --name, which tells it use the container names instead of their IDs, which is handy if you recreate your container, right? But you keep the name, then the systemd unit file will still reference the proper container. Otherwise, the ID will change every time you recreate the container. So say there's a new version of your container, you want to pull it and rerun it, you'll probably stop your old container, delete it, run the new one, right? And then the ID would change, but the name won't if you use the same name. Okay, and then we're going to use the container name. What did I call it? Persist web, right? Let me look back here. I called it persistent web. Okay, and what this should do is give us systemd unit files, right? I got all the stuff. All right, so root container persistent web service. If I look right here. Right, now what I can do is just copy this right into what is it? Etsy systemd system, right?
Yeah, Etsy systemd system. So there's also, while Nate's working on that, one of the things we didn't get to today is rootless containers. So we've been
Right.
doing the whole thing as root, but one of the really nice things about containers is that you could do them as regular users, and then you don't have to give permissions to things like the Etsy system directory to regular people, or you don't have to give them root access to your system for them to do stuff. You can create systemd units and run them as a user in the user's home directory as well. So that when your system is rebooted, um, it will start up this container as well.
List units, right? It's going to grep
It's
for
units, not
container.
unties.
Unties is so much better though. All right, so that was probably not the right thing to do. Let's look for persistent. It should show up here as container persistent web, but it isn't for some reason. It names something else. What do we get for not planning this too far ahead?
Right.
I'm going off
I think the
script.
biggest thing is that we can enable it and that it gets
Yeah.
started every time the machine starts. So if the machine were to reboot, this container would be started back up after that reboot as one of the system services.
It should be container persistent web dot service. So we're going to copy that. Oh, I'd already copied it.
All right. While Nate is continuing to troubleshoot, some other things that you might think about when operationalizing containers. Using things like reverse proxies so that you can have this container image running on a whole bunch of different boxes and have an internet ingress that gets directed to one of your pool of systems running the service. So once we have it going as a service, now it's really easy to maintain that across a pile of machines. You can also use things like firewall destination NAT rules, right? So we were doing things like tying port 8080 to our container, but that's not usually what people's web browser will connect to, right? Then you have to make them specify the port number, which is gross. So we can do things like DNAT rules on the container host to say when I get incoming connection to port 80, I really want to send it to port 8080 on my machine so that you can still have your container run rootlessly attached to unprivileged ports, but then handle at the host layer how we should direct traffic to those ports. Same thing is true for your reverse proxy, right? You could set up your reverse proxy if incoming port 80, we want to send it to one of these boxes and a specific port on that box.
Yeah, what I do for my own websites and whatever is I have a little host running on a cloud provider. All my containers are running, and I just have an Nginx system installed right on the machine, and that becomes my ingress, right? So whenever you go to one of the websites, it terminates at Nginx. Nginx knows where the container is based on what port I gave it, and it can just hand the traffic right over to the right thing. If I ever want to build a new version of one of those containers, I can build a brand new one on a new port and switch it at Nginx, and then my website's never even down, right? If I wanted to do it that way. But I did get the systemd unit file to work. If you want to just go back to the terminal for a sec, I can give you a quick rundown of how that worked. So you can see I enabled it here, right? System control enable container persistent web.service. It told me, yep, I enabled the thing. Here, podman PS, I'm showing you that that container is not running at the moment because I didn't start it yet. I just enabled it. Then I did system control start on the container and podman PS again, and there it is up and running. Now, if we were to curl it again, we should get the same awesome hi website that I set up. And I realize that's blocked, but if I clear the screen, you won't see it. Here, let's Control L again, and then let's do a podman PS. See, there it is running persistent web. So Yeah, you can run them with systemd. And that's handy because, of course, if the system restarts or something, systemd will restart it for you.
So, unbeknownst to our audience, producer Eric is back there smashing the hurry up and finish button since we were overtime today. So,
Yeah.
thank you for joining us. Nate, what do we have coming up next week?
What do we have? We have like a debugging and troubleshooting, don't we? Or am I
No,
wrong? Let me go look at the notes. I'm wrong, aren't I?
it's pods. You're going to
It's
talk to us
pods. That's
about
right.
pods.
We're going to talk about pods. In some other episode, we might talk about debugging and troubleshooting, but that hasn't been written yet, so sorry.
Yeah, I think that's the one we're planning in 2 weeks, right? So,
Yeah.
still,
Yeah.
we have many minutes before that show to come up with what we're doing during that show.
Yeah, it's going to, have all kind of debugging stuff in it. All
So
right.
join
So
us.
yeah, we're going to talk about pods and how you can sort of group containers within Podman, and that's essentially what we're going to talk about next time. So
And then also don't forget to catch the next RHEL Presents, which is Eric's show where he'll be talking with Fedora project lead Matthew Miller. Also, we're starting a mini series, which is I think 9 or 10 episodes of content talking about Red Hat Insights. And if you've not seen Insights in a bit, you may remember it as the thing that tells you how to fix things that may not be correct on your system. That's Advisor. But there's tons and tons more applications in there now, like vulnerability management, golden image building with Image Builder,
yeah,
compliance. So you can be like, oh, I want to be CIS benchmark compliant. And then you can like grade the machines in your fleet on their compliance against that standard.
yeah,
So
vulnerability and compliance, in my opinion, are game changers for anyone who has to be compliant, or if you're just worried about your systems being compliant. Right? They're so handy. They're so great. They're great tools. I know I work here and all, but I used to be a sysadmin. If I had that tool as a sysadmin, I'd be very happy.
Nate, you missed it while you're doing your demo. There was a lot of chatter about my profile picture, and I just wanted to show everyone like that is my actual badge photo from my Red Hat employee badge. Um, so there you go. The ethos continues. All
Mr.
right,
Pirate.
that's right.
Pirate
All
Scat.
right. So we'll see you all next time. Until then, happy into the terminaling. See y'all later.
Yeah, have a great one.